อุบบนอุบเลยว่าคุณมีการค้ากับผมอ่ะแต่ทำไมคุณถึงมีเงื่อนไขเหล่านี้เยอะแยะไปหมดเลยอ่ะแล้วมีภาษีต่างๆซ่อนเร้นเต็มไปหมดเลยงั้นการที่เขาได้เจรจากับตัวของเวียดนามเจรจากับอินโดนีเซียตัวของ EU เกาหลีใต้ญี่ปุ่นใช่ไหมครับก็เป็นการเปิดตลาดให้กับประเภทโล่งโจ้งเลยอันนี้คือโล่งโจ้งสำหรับเขาก็หมายความว่าในอนาคต
มาพิสูจน์ความไวของออริจินอลซอยเปปไทด์กันเปปไทด์ใส่สั้นเร็วขนาดเล็กดูดซึมไวโอ้โหถึงสมองไวชาร์จสมองติดสปีดต้องออริจินอลซอยเปปไทด์ดื่มเปปทีน
Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, the countdown to the president's tariff deadline.
The trade team has been working around the clock to try to be in correspondence with as many countries as possible. But if they haven't heard from us yet, they will in the form of a letter or an executive order by midnight tonight.
Donald Trump unleashing a series of trade deals and demands on the eve of his Friday deadline just hours from now, giving Mexico a 90-day reprieve from higher tariffs, imposing a 25% levy on goods from India, gearing up now to sign an executive order, and threatening Canada's deal over its move to recognize a Palestinian state.
The clock is ticking down to midnight when those tariffs are set to kick in, with the president delivering a concise, all-caps message. The August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline and will not be extended. Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and Democratic Congresswoman Susan DelBene of Washington will both join us with reaction.
Plus, the big tech earnings came out just after the close from Amazon and Apple as they rush to capitalize on the AI boom.
And the SpaceX launch that wasn't. The last-minute scrapping of the planned crewed SpaceX liftoff to the International Space Station. What happened and what it means for future attempts coming up.
We begin tonight, though, at the White House and the latest flurry of trade announcements the administration has shared ahead of the deadline that kicks off in just 7 hours from now. Bloomberg's Skylar Woodhouse has more live from the West Wing tonight. Skylar, welcome back. Of course, to Balance of Power, do we have all the deals we're going to get?
Well, time is ticking here at the White House, and that is currently the question of, I guess you could say, the hour on when can we expect to see that executive order, that the president is supposed to sign ahead of the deadline. The evening is winding down, and it could be, an 11th hour executive order that comes across, but we are on high alert for any letters or executive orders that the president could be signing.
Well, and especially given the president and other White House officials' repeated insistence that the August 1st deadline would not be budging, yet Mexico was able to secure a 90-day extension. Skylar, is there a chance that any other countries are going to be able to get that treatment?
Look, I think we'll have to just wait and see what happens. I mean, I think what we've seen from President Trump throughout this tariff saga is, he says one thing, it's sort of walked back a little bit, and we see these negotiations just sort of going back and forth. So only time will tell if, countries get an exact rate or if they get an extension. And that's something certainly that only the president knows right now.
We've got the countdown clock up for our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, about 7 hours away, just shy of 7 hours. The president has made clear, Skylar, we should remind ourselves that this isn't the end of the story, right? There is still a welcome sign up for countries who want to make a phone call and engage in negotiations.
Absolutely. And I think that's something, the president wants to see. He wants countries to, call him or come, to the U.S. and visit the White House and have these talks, have these negotiations with him. So even though, these tariffs, are set to go into place tomorrow, it still raises questions on what kind of wiggle room comes after August 1st, and if there's, maybe going to be more negotiations and more rates that are set as countries continue to have these conversations.
Well, and Skylar, there's also a massive legal question as to whether or not the president's authority that he's chosen to use to implement these tariffs, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, IEPA, is going to stand. An appeals court heard arguments both ways today. Is there a chance that the White House is going to have to abandon these shortly after implementing them if the courts say so?
No, that's a great question, Kaylee. Something I was trying to process myself today, knowing what's going on in the courts right now. So I think we'll have to sort of wait and see how exactly the White House moves forward, with these tariff, with the executive order and everything we're expecting tonight, to see how the courts react or what that means with the current ruling that is going through the courts right now.
All right, Bloomberg's Skylar Woodhouse live from the White House for us. Thank you so much. And today on the early edition of Balance of Power, we spoke with Ron Kirk, the former U.S. trade representative in the Obama administration, who told us this about how markets are viewing the president's trade moves.
The one reason I think you've seen the markets not overreact to this is they've become a little bit dependent on the belief that when he gets up to the point of knowing the economic harm these tariffs would inflict, he has found a way to back away. He did it with China, did it with Mexico today. We've done it with Japan. So we'll have to see.
Now, the markets, of course, had to digest all of the trade news along with an uptick in the Fed's preferred inflation gauge today. And helping us unpack that in today's Power Moves is Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who's joining us live from World Headquarters in New York.
And the market has been on edge with regards to this August 1st deadline, Kelly. But part of the buffer here for asset prices has been the idea that most of the companies that have outsized exposure to any sort of tariff or trade policy have so far found a way to mitigate that. You saw that in big moves earlier today out of a lot of companies, including eBay, which closed at a record high. Roku, which just reported earnings after the bell. They did mention tariffs. They did say it did hurt device sales. But again, a lot of these companies are well diversified and they have ways to pick up the slack elsewhere. Of course, policies coming out of Washington still has an impact and investors are still hanging on every word. You saw that play out in the pharmaceutical sector today. As a group, they had one of their worst days going back at least to mid-May. And that was after we had news here that the Trump administration sending out letters here to the pharmaceutical companies with regards to potential tariffs on that front should you not find maybe a little bit more of a way to reshore some of the manufacturing and sourcing of materials in that space. Also on the policy front, and this just came in the after hours trade, you saw a pop in the shares of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Remember them? These are the GSEs, government-sponsored entities that control more than half of the mortgages in the United States, reporting here that after meetings with the heads of Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs, that Trump has been asking those CEOs to come up with a plan for a path forward for Fannie and Freddie that maybe could unleash them from the conservatorship that they've been in since the global financial crisis.
Always great to have you, Romaine. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick at World Headquarters in New York with a lot to cover every night these days. As we turn back now to the trade news coming from the White House, Wall Street is paying close attention to this. The president set to sign an executive order codifying existing trade deals ahead of tonight's midnight deadline after giving Mexico a 90-day pause on increased tariffs as these negotiations continue. Joining us now live from Capitol Hill for a lot more on this, Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who, of course, chairs the Senate Commerce Committee. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I guess I should say Happy Liberation Day, the sequel. Here we are. It takes effect at midnight tonight, as you well know. And people should know that Texas has a lot at stake here. The largest exporter of any state in the country. I'm not sure everyone's aware of that. And the second largest importer of products from overseas. A 15% levy based on the number crunching at Bloomberg would find that those imports could be as much as $60 billion more in duties. With this said, how does this tariff policy help the state of Texas?
Well, listen, I think President Trump has demonstrated the effectiveness of tariffs as leverage to open foreign markets. I'll tell you, within the Trump administration, I think there are two camps. There's one camp that is urging the president use the threat of tariffs to persuade our trading partners to lower the tariffs they put on American goods and to lift non-tariff barriers. That camp, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, is in that camp. I'm emphatically in that camp, urging the president. This is an incredible opportunity to expand the ability of Texas and the entire country to export. There is another camp in the administration that doesn't view tariffs as a means to an end, doesn't view them as a way to incentivize other countries lowering their tariffs, but rather sees them as a permanent feature of our economic system, wants high tariffs in perpetuity. I think that position is wrong. I think that position would be really harmful, but I'm gratified because the president has predominantly been listening to the former camp rather than the latter. I hope he continues to.
Well, and of course, the president says tariffs do not constitute his economic policy alone. There is also, of course, his tax policy, which was advanced through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And last you joined us, Senator, we talked about one of your contributions to that legislation, the Trump savings accounts, which were your brainchild. I'd like to ask you about that, given the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent yesterday said, and I quote, that those accounts are a backdoor for privatizing Social Security. Was that your intention?
Well, listen, what they are is an avenue for all of our kids to invest and save. And so the Trump accounts, and they'll be launched next year on July 4th, on the 250th anniversary of the birthday of our country. Every child in America will get a personal investment account. Newborn children will get it seeded with $1,000. And parents and family and employers can contribute up to $5,000 a year in a tax-advantaged account, and that money will be invested in the S&P 500. And the advantages of that are twofold. Number one, every child in America will now benefit from the miracle of compound growth. And I think this was Scott Bessent's point. So let's take a little girl that's born next year. She has the account opened for her. She has $1,000 automatically put into it. And let's say each year parents or family or employer puts $5,000 a year in that account. If you assume the historical rate of growth of the S&P 500, which is 7%, that account, that little girl, by the time she is 18 years old, will have $170,000 in that account. And if she keeps putting $5,000 a year, by the time she is 35, she will have $700,000 in that account. And that's every kid. That's not just the kids of rich parents. That is really transformational. I think that was Secretary Bessent's point, which is if you have a new generation where when she is 70, when she's retired and on Social Security, if she's got hundreds of thousands or even millions invested in the market, she will be able to retire with much greater financial security than she would have otherwise. That's an incredible win for everyone.
Well, while that did make it into the reconciliation bill, Senator, something else you were pushing for did not get included in that package, and that's stopping the Fed's authority to pay interest on bank reserves. You are now pushing a separate piece of legislation trying to achieve that same objective, which I know you've argued could save $1 trillion over a decade. The Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, says the suggestion that this would save money is an illusion and that actually it could spur volatility in financial markets. How do you guarantee that this doesn't disrupt short-end rates?
Well, let's look at a little bit of history. The Fed was created in 1913, and from 1913 until 2007, the Fed paid zero, not a penny in interest on reserves. It was actually illegal for it to pay interest. In 2008, in the midst of the great financial crisis, Congress, for the first time, gave it the ability to pay interest on reserves. And at the time, it was a very low interest rate. It was 25 basis points, so it was very small. What happened under Joe Biden is the interest the Fed began paying skyrocketed. So last year, in 2024, the Fed paid $186 billion in interest on reserves. That is massive, and it's projected over the next decade to pay $1.1 trillion. It's paying right now at a rate of 4.4%. The result of that is the banks have parked $3.4 trillion in capital with the Fed, because essentially what this is a zero-risk savings account for banks, and they're just getting paid. Right now, the taxpayers are giving hundreds of billions of dollars to giant banks, And not only that, more than 40% of that money is being paid to foreign banks. So it's not even American banks, because the European Central Bank is only paying 2.2%. The Fed is paying 4.4%. So American taxpayers are paying foreign banks. This doesn't make any sense. And so the legislation I introduced, called the FAIR Act, returns the Fed to the way it operated for a century until 2008, which is not paying interest on reserves. That would save a lot of money, but it would do something else also. It would lower interest rates, because banks, instead of parking money at the Fed, they would take some of that money to buy Treasury notes. That would drive down the interest rates, which would mean for consumers at home buying a new car, buying a new house, their interest rates would go down as well. I think this is a win-win. And it's not surprising to me that the chairman of the Fed doesn't want to end it. And it's also not surprising to me that giant banks like getting billions and billions of dollars from the taxpayers. But I think it's time for this corporate welfare to be put to an end.
Senator Cruz, I want to ask you about something that's happening in your state, not in your legislative body, but the state legislature is working to redraw congressional districts in Texas that the president says will generate 5 new Republican seats that may well help Republicans hold their majority in the House. I talked about this with a Republican colleague of yours in the House today, Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York, about the idea of gerrymandering happening not only in Texas, but maybe in other states, with Republicans and Democrats eyeing this same thing. Here was her response. We'll have you tell us what you think. Listen.
As somebody who is a victim of gerrymandering, I don't care if it's the Republicans or the Democrats that are doing it. It's wrong, and it should not be done. We have to make sure people are electing their representatives, and to try to alter a map to tilt the scale is wrong. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats, gerrymandering is wrong. It should not be done. It's corrupt. And we have to make these maps as fair and balanced and competitive as possible. And perhaps we need to move toward computer-generated maps or just court independently drawn maps.
Senator, you hear the arguments. Of course, a lot of people blame gerrymandering for the partisan politics that we have in this country. What part of what the Congresswoman said is not correct?
Listen, number one, I think it's a good thing that the Texas legislature is moving forward with redistricting. As you noted, the map they put out is designed to elect an additional 5 Republicans to Congress. That could well be the difference between maintaining a Republican majority in the House for the next 4 years or not. And if you look at all the incredible victories we've won in the last 6 months, whether securing the border and an historic investment into building the wall and securing the border, or the biggest tax cut of our lifetimes, all of that happened because we have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president. And so I'm grateful for anything that increases the chances of good policies, low taxes, low regulations that produce jobs and prosperity and abundance. Let me say, secondly, what the Texas legislature did is produced a map that better reflects the values of Texas. Texas is a conservative state. It makes sense that we elect a congressional delegation that reflects those values. And I got to say, when it comes to gerrymandering, I'm in particular amused at the Democrats who are clutching their pearls, because the Democrats have always been much, much more ruthless in gerrymandering. I'll give
แล้วก็น่าสนใจนะครับตรงนี้ครับดอลลาร์อินเด็กซ์เนี่ยทะลุขึ้นมาเนี่ยอยู่ที่ 99.9 ก็คือดอลลาร์กลับมาแข็งค่าตอนนี้กลับมาแข็งค่ายืนเหนือเส้นค่าเฉลี่ย200 วันเป็นครั้งแรกนับตั้งแต่วันที่3 มีนาปี 2025 ก็คือปีเนี้ยขึ้นมายืนเหนือเส้นค่าเฉลี่ย200 วันค่าเฉลี่ย100 วันครั้งแรกเลยคำถามคือยืนได้ไหมการที่ดอลลาร์แข็งแบบนี้ก็จะทำให้ค่าเงินต่างๆในเอเชียเนี่ยอาจจะมาแข่งกัน อาจจะมาแข่งกันอ่อนต่อซึ่งนั่นจะเป็นสงครามครั้งถัดไปหลังจากสงครามภาษีนะเดี๋ยวผมจะมาอธิบายให้ฟังว่าคืออะไรตัวยุโรปครับยุโรปเนี่ยตัวยูโรซ็อก50เนี่ยลดลงมาประมาณ 1.3% ลงมาค่อนข้างแรงเหมือนกันแต่ว่ายุโรปก็รอบนี้ก็ขึ้นมานะไม่สามารถทะลุไฮ เสียวคือตอนลงจะลงได้หนักหรือเปล่าแต่ว่าในมุมของความเสี่ยงที่เรามีคุณทรัมป์ยังนั่งอยู่ในตำแหน่งประธานาธิบดีขณะนี้ก็ในมุมของ asset allocation ก็กระจายการลงทุนถือไว้ก่อนแต่ว่าในมุมของเทรดดิ้งเนี่ยผมคิดว่าผมอยู่ขาช็อตนะผมอยู่ในขาว่าใครเล่นสั้นอยู่ฝั่งช็อตน่าจะคุ้มกว่านะครับราคาน้ำมันนะครับดีดทะลุขึ้นมาเกินค่าเฉลี่ย200วันอีกทีหนึ่งแต่ว่าขึ้นมาทะลุได้ขึ้นมาชนแนวต้านเนี่ยที่เป็นดาวเทรนไลน์ก่อนหน้านี้มีฟอลเบรกขึ้นไป2ทีแล้วสุดท้ายก็ไม่ผ่านผมยังมองน้ำมันเป็นวิวลงนะทั้ง2ตัวเลยทั้ง WTI แล้วก็ทั้งตัว Blend นะครับในขณะที่ตัวบอนด์ยิลด์2 ปีมีดีดกลับขึ้นมาหลังจากที่เฟดคงดอกเบี้ยแล้วก็บอนด์ยิลด์10 ปีก็ทรงๆอยู่ที่แถวๆประมาณ 4.37 ต้องมารอทิศทางดอกเบี้ยอยู่เขาบอกว่าโอกาสที่เฟดจะลดดอกเบี้ยในครั้งหน้าครั้งที่ผ่านมาเมื่อวานนี้ไม่ลดแล้วนะแต่ว่าครั้งหน้าเนี่ยมีโอกาสลดก็ถ้ามีโอกาสลดจริงก็บอนด์ยิลด์แปลว่าตัว2 ปีเนี่ยต่ำกว่า 4% เราน่าจะเห็นอย่างเงี้ยไปอย่างน้อยๆก็45 วันเช่นเดียวกับบอนด์ยิลด์10 ปีผมคิดว่าทรงอยู่แถวเนี้ยครับไม่น่าจะเกิน 4.5 ขึ้นไปได้เพราะฉะนั้นตรงนี้ก็เป็นจังหวะในการลงทุนในพวกกองทุนตราสารหนี้โลกยังคิดว่ายังโอเคอยู่ยังได้อยู่ครับพี่ปั๊บครับ
ครับแล้วก็ในช่วงนี้นะครับใครที่อยากจะหาข้อมูลเรื่องการลงทุนอยากจะปรับพอร์ตอยากจะให้ทีมงานของ Phenomena เนี่ยช่วยดูแลพอร์ตของท่านนะครับตอนนี้เราก็มีโครงการต่างๆมากมายครับใครที่มีพอร์ตอยู่แล้วนะครับอยากให้เราช่วยแก้พอร์ตครับส่งพอร์ตมารีบูตนะครับเริ่มใหม่อย่างมีแผนงานครับด้วยการลงทุนในแผนที่ใช่ไม่ว่าตลาดจะเปลี่ยนไปยังไงก็ตามนะครับสแกน QR Code นะครับส่งพอร์ตให้เราเข้ามาดูได้ แล้วก็มีกองทุนด้วยนะครับใครที่กองทุน LTF ติดดอยอยู่เนี่ยอยากจะแก้พอร์ตหุ้นไทยก็ส่งเข้ามาได้ในโครงการ Reboot Fund Port นะครับนอกจากนี้ก็มีกองทุนตราสารหนี้นะครับหรือว่าตราสารหนี้หุ้นกู้ที่ท่านถืออยู่เนี่ยถ้าอยากจะช่วยให้เราดูนะให้เราช่วยดูก็ส่งเข้ามาให้ดูได้นะครับมีหลากหลายสินทรัพย์เลยครับที่อยู่ในช่วงของโครงการ Reboot นะครับมา Reboot กันทั้งพอร์ตหุ้นพอร์ตกองทุนแล้วก็พอร์ตตราสารหนี้ครับพี่แบงค์
ครับผมก็โครงการนี้ชื่อโครงการ Reboot Your Port นะก็คือมาเริ่มต้นใหม่ให้พอร์ตคุณแข็งแรงกว่าเดิมพอร์ตตอนนี้ที่เรารับบริการก็มีอยู่3อย่างนะครับ1ก็คือกองทุนซึ่งเป็น Product หลักในการบริการของ Phenomena 2ก็คือบอนหรือว่าตัวตราสารหนี้ที่คุณถืออยู่ซึ่งที่ผ่านมาอย่าง 2-3 ปีที่ผ่านมาเราเจอหุ้นกู้ที่มีการ default ใช่ไหม หรือเหตุการณ์ความไม่สงบหรือการแผ่นดินไหวที่เกิดขึ้นมาอย่างเงี้ยทำให้นักลงทุนไม่สบายใจในการถือตราสารหนี้อยากรู้ว่าคุณภาพตราสารหนี้ที่ตัวเองถือเนี่ยยังโอเคอยู่หรือเปล่าก็ส่งมาให้เราตรวจสอบได้และอีกอย่างหนึ่งครับก็คือหุ้นรายตัวเลยเป็นหุ้นไทยที่คุณแบบว่าติดมาตั้งนานแล้วยังลังเลตอนนี้เรามีโซลูชันหลายโซลูชันนะจะถือต่อจะสลับสับเปลี่ยนหรือว่าจะปรับใหม่เลยก็สามารถส่งมาได้ทั้ง3 asset class นะครับ
ครับเรามาดูกันกับเรื่องของการประกาศตัวเลขภาษีเมื่อคืนนี้กันเลยนะครับก็ไปดูที่ไทยก่อนครับล่าสุดเช้านี้เป็นข่าวดีของประเทศไทยนะครับที่เราถูกเก็บภาษีในอัตรา 19% ครับก็ถือว่าเป็นข่าวดีนะครับที่หลายๆคนเฝ้าลุ้นเฝ้าเอาใจช่วยครับสำนักข่าวบลูมเบิร์กเนี่ยรายงานนะครับว่าประเทศไทยถูกเก็บภาษีในอัตรา 19%หลังจากที่เมื่อวานนี้ตัวแทนนะครับโฆษกของทำเนียบขาวออกมาแถลงข่าว ประกาศตัวเลขอัตราภาษีใหม่ที่หลากหลายประเทศก็ถูกเก็บในอัตราที่ไม่เท่ากันนะครับ โดยไทยเนี่ยถูกเก็บนะครับจากเดิม 36 ก็ลงมาเหลือ 19 เท่ากับกัมพูชาแล้วก็มาเลเซียเลยนะครับสำนักข่าวบลูมเบิร์กก็วิเคราะห์ว่าส่วนหนึ่งอาจจะเป็นเพราะว่าเรื่องของการบรรลุข้อตกลงหยุดยิงกับกัมพูชานะครับซึ่งอัตราภาษีใหม่นี้สอดคล้องกับประเทศเพื่อนบ้านในเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้อย่างอินโดนีเซียฟิลิปปินส์แล้วก็มาเลเซียด้วยนะครับอย่างมาเลเซียเนี่ยก็ได้เครดิตไปในฐานะตัวกลางช่วยเจรจาสงบศึกนะครับซึ่งมาตรการใหม่นี้ก็ถูกประกาศหลังจากที่คุณทรัมป์นะครับเคยขู่ว่าจะยกเลิกข้อตกลงการค้ากับไทยและกัมพูชาถ้าหากว่าไม่ยุติการปะทะกันที่ชายแดนครับในช่วงที่ผ่านมานะครับไทยก็ได้มีความพยายามในการเจรจาแล้วก็เสนอให้เปิดตลาดสินค้าที่จะนำสินค้าจากสหรัฐอเมริกาเข้ามามากขึ้นโดยบอกว่ายอมจะยกเลิกภาษีศุลกากรสูงถึง 90% ของรายการสินค้านำเข้าทั้งหมดแล้วก็นอกจากนี้นะครับให้คำมั่นสัญญาว่าจะลดดุลการค้ากับสหรัฐครับให้ลดการขาดดุลมูลค่ากว่า 46,000 ล้านนะครับใช้เวลาเนี่ยประมาณ3 ปีไทยก็จะมีเรื่องดุลการค้ากับสหรัฐสมดุลมากขึ้นนะครับพร้อมกันนี้ไทยก็บอกว่าจะควบคุมการส่งออกสินค้า ที่เป็นทางผ่านเพื่อหลีกเลี่ยงนะครับการจ่ายภาษีที่ใช้ไทยเป็นทางผ่านโดยอ้างเรื่องของแหล่งผลิตแล้วก็พอมีการประกาศตัวเลขออกมาเนี่ยนะครับก็ถือว่าเป็นข่าวดีครับเช้านี้เราก็เลยเห็นว่าทางผู้แทนนะครับแล้วก็ตัวคุณพิชัยเองเนี่ยออกมาแสดงความยินดีกับการเจรจาในครั้งนี้ด้วยครับเดี๋ยวเรามาดูหน่อยครับว่าคุณพิชัยออกมาพูดอะไรบ้างเมื่อประมาณ40นาทีที่ผ่านมานี่เองนะครับคุณพิชัยชุนหวชิระรัฐมนตรีว่าการกระทรวงการคลังนะครับในฐานะหัวหน้าทีมไทยแลนด์ผู้แทนในการเจรจารอบนี้เนี่ยออกมาประกาศแสดงความยินดีครับคุณพิชัยระบุว่าการประกาศตัวเลข tariff นะครับหรือว่าอัตราภาษีศุลกากรที่ 19%สะท้อนถึงมิตรภาพและความเป็นพันธมิตรที่แน่นแฟ้นระหว่างไทยกับสหรัฐช่วยให้ไทยยังคงแข่งขันได้ในเวทีโลกสร้างความเชื่อมั่นต่อนักลงทุนและเปิดประตูสู่การขยายตัวทางเศรษฐกิจรายได้และโอกาสใหม่ๆให้กับประเทศไทยการทำงานยังไม่สิ้นสุดรัฐบาลตระหนักถึงผลกระทบต่อผู้ประกอบการและพี่น้องเกษตรกรจึงได้จัดเตรียมมาตรการรองรับอย่างรอบด้านทั้งงบประมาณซอฟท์โลนเงินอุดหนุนมาตรการภาษีและการปฏิรูปกฎระเบียบที่จำเป็นเพื่อยกระดับให้ไทยสามารถปรับตัวและก้าวสู่โลกเศรษฐกิจในอนาคตได้อย่างมั่นใจผลการเจรจาครั้งนี้เป็นสัญญาณให้ประเทศไทยต้องเร่งปรับตัวเดินหน้าสร้างเศรษฐกิจที่มั่นคงแข็งแกร่งและพร้อมรับมือกับความท้าทายของโลกในอนาคตขอบคุณทีมไทยแลนด์สำหรับความทุ่มเทและความพยายามอย่างเต็มที่ในสถานการณ์ที่ยากจะควบคุมแต่เรายังมีภารกิจอีกมากที่ต้องสู้ต่อไปเพื่อประเทศไทยของพวกเราทุกคนนะครับอันนี้ก็เป็นโพสต์ข้อความโซเชียลมีเดียของคุณพิชัยนะครับที่เพิ่งจะโพสต์ไปเมื่อประมาณ50นาทีที่ผ่านมานี้นะครับพร้อมกันนี้เนี่ยก็มีการโพสต์รูปแปะไว้ด้วยนะฮะบอกว่าสหรัฐประกาศ tariff rate ที่ 19%ขอบคุณทุกความทุ่มเทของทีมไทยแลนด์ครับอันนี้ก็เป็นข้อความที่ออกมาจากคุณพิชัยชุนหวชิระนะครับรัฐมนตรีว่าการกระทรวงการคลังรองนายกในฐานะผู้แทนหัวหน้าทีมไทยแลนด์ที่เข้าไปเจรจาในครั้งนี้นะครับเดี๋ยวเรามาดูตัวเลขอัตราภาษีกันหน่อยฮะว่าที่ประกาศในเช้านี้ประเทศไหนได้เท่าไหร่บ้างนะครับในประกาศของทำเนียบขาวเนี่ยเขาก็มีการเรียงลำดับนะครับตามอักษรชื่อประเทศนะครับส่วนประเทศไทยก็จะอยู่ท้ายๆหน่อยเพราะเป็นตัวทีนะครับปรากฏว่าไทยเนี่ยถูกเก็บภาษีนะครับ 19%ต่ำกว่าไต้หวันนะครับไต้หวันถูกเก็บ 20ครับแล้วก็มีประเทศอื่นๆนะครับอย่างที่น่าสนใจก็มีสหราชอาณาจักรนะครับถูกเก็บ 10%แล้วก็เวียดนามครับเวียดนามเนี่ยถูกเก็บ 20% นะครับสูงกว่าไทยครับนอกจากนี้นะครับก็มีประเทศอื่นครับถ้าไล่มาตั้งแต่ตัว A นะฮะก็จะมาเจออัฟกานิสถานอัลจีเรียที่น่าสนใจคือกัมพูชาถูกเก็บ 19%บราซิลเนี่ยที่เคยขู่ว่าจะเก็บเกิน 40-50% เนี่ยสุดท้ายก็ถูกเก็บ 10% นะครับแล้วก็มียุโรปครับยุโรปเนี่ยเขาบอกแบ่งเป็น2ตารางก็มีรายการสินค้าในส่วนที่1กับส่วนที่2ฮะในส่วนที่1เนี่ยถูกเก็บ 0% เลยนะครับส่วนที่2ถูกเก็บ 15% ซึ่งก็จะมีรายการสินค้าแตกต่างกันไปอินเดียโดน 25% นะครับอินโดนีเซียถูกเก็บ 19% ญี่ปุ่น 15%ลาวเนี่ยยังคงเป็นประเทศที่ถูกเก็บสูงอยู่นะครับถูกเก็บ 40% แล้วก็มีมาเลเซียครับ 19%ก็บูมเบิร์กบอกว่ามาเลเซียเนี่ยเป็นตัวกลางในการเจรจานะครับทำให้ไทยกับกัมพูชาสามารถหาข้อตกลงหยุดยิงกันได้ก็อาจจะได้เครดิตในส่วนนี้ไปแล้วก็มีประเทศอื่นๆนะครับก็มีในฝั่งของฟิลิปปินส์ครับถูกเก็บ 19% ครับแล้วก็เกาหลีใต้ 15%ก็ถือว่าประเทศไทยนะครับสามารถทำได้ค่อนข้างดีทีเดียวเช้านี้เนี่ยเราก็เลยเห็นข่าวดีนะครับที่ถือว่าเป็นความสำเร็จในเรื่องของการเจรจาจากประเทศไทยนะครับในหลายฝ่ายก็ออกมาแสดงความชื่นชมยินดีกันแล้วในเช้านี้ครับพี่แบงค์
อือฮึครับผมเอ่อพี่ปั๊บพี่ปั๊บเห็นข่าวใน CNBC ไหมหัวใหญ่ตอนนั้นมันชื่อ Trump Breaches Tariff Race Ahead of Deadline ผมเข้าไปอ่านในรายละเอียดอีกทีหนึ่งคือผมไม่รู้สิผมไม่ค่อยสบายใจว่าเรา 19% จริงเหรอแต่พออ่านข่าวคือทรัมป์เขามีลงนาม Executive Order อีกใบหนึ่งก็คือไอ้ตัว Reciprocal Tariff นั่นแหละรายละเอียดของคำสั่งใหม่อันเนี้ยออกมาอีกอันหนึ่งนะเขาบอกว่าประเทศที่ไม่มีข้อตกลงทางการค้ากับสหรัฐน่าจะถูกเก็บภาษีเพิ่มขึ้นอีก 10% อันนี้คือเราไม่ใช่เพราะเรามีข้อตกลงแล้วเราอยู่ในกระดานตารางเมื่อกี้แต่เขาบอกว่าสินค้าที่มีพฤติกรรม transshipment คือส่งผ่านเพื่อเลี่ยงภาษีจะโดนภาษีเพิ่มอีก 40% แน่อันเนี้ยผมคิดว่าเรามีความเสี่ยงไหมเพราะทรัมป์ขู่มาก่อนถูกไหมพี่ปั๊บขู่มาก่อนว่าเราเนี่ยทั้งส่งผ่านสินค้าเข้าอเมริกาโดยใช้สินค้าจีน และนำชิปจากอเมริกาเข้ามาไทยเพื่อเข้าไปขายในจีนเพราะนั้นมันเหมือนกับว่าตารางนั้นเป็นตารางมาตรฐานอันนั้นที่ใครทุกคนจะโดนแต่ว่ามีทรานชิปเมนต์40%ถ้าโดนตรวจสอบเจอจะเพิ่มขึ้นแล้วก็ประเทศที่กำลังเจรจาดีลเนี่ยเดี๋ยวเขาบอกว่าเดี๋ยวเขาจะใช้อัตราภาษีใหม่แบบชั่วคราวและอัตราคำสั่งใหม่จะมีผล7 วันก็คือสุดท้ายอย่างเม็กซิโกอย่างเงี้ยก็ดีเลย์นะสุดท้ายเม็กซิโกก็ดีเลย์ต่อนะฮะแคนาดาอย่างเงี้ยโดนเสีย25-35แต่ก็ยกเว้นสินค้าที่อยู่ข้อตกลง USMCA แต่ว่าเนี่ยไอ้คำนี้แหละไอ้ที่ผมบอก transshipment tariff ก็คือจะโดนเพิ่มขึ้นอีก40%ซึ่งถือว่าเยอะนะคำถามคือนั่นน่ะ19%ใช่ตัวเลข final rate ของเราแล้วจริงๆหรือเปล่าอันเนี้ยผมไม่แน่ใจจริงๆผมไม่แน่ใจจริงๆเพราะว่าอาจจะถือซะว่าเป็นเรื่องดีก่อนแล้วผมคิดว่าลองดู react ของตลาดแล้วกันผมคิดว่าตลาดน่าจะตอบเราได้ดีมากกว่า10 โมงวันเนี้ยตลาด react ทางไหนแสดงว่าคนน่ะเห็นว่าเฮ้ยมีความเป็นไปได้มากน้อยยังไงก็ว่ากันอีกทีหนึ่งนะครับ
ครับแล้วก็นอกจากนี้นะครับประเทศอื่นๆเนี่ยเป็นยังไงบ้างที่ถูกเก็บกันเท่าไหร่นะครับนักลงทุนนักวิเคราะห์เขามองเรื่องนี้กันยังไงเรามาดูรายการภาษีที่ประเทศอื่นถูกเก็บเพิ่มเติมกันด้วยนะครับอย่างที่บอกไปว่าตอนนี้คุณทรัมป์ก็ออกมาประกาศอัตราภาษีพร้อมกันเนี่ยทั่วโลกนะครับในหลายประเทศเลยทีเดียวครับจะเห็นว่าอัตราภาษีขั้นต่ำที่ถูกเก็บตอนนี้อยู่ที่ประมาณ 10% นะครับแล้วเขาก็บอกมีการจัดกลุ่ม รายประเทศนะครับโดยส่วนใหญ่เนี่ยคนที่มีการเกินดุลการค้ากับสหรัฐก็จะถูกเก็บในอัตราประมาณตั้งแต่ 15% ขึ้นไปซึ่งประเทศที่มีการเกินดุลนะครับแต่ยังไม่บรรลุข้อตกลงเนี่ยถูกเก็บภาษีสูงอย่างที่เราเห็นในรายการเมื่อสักครู่นี้นะครับก็คืออินเดียถูกเก็บ 25%ไต้หวันถูกเก็บ 20%สวิตเซอร์แลนด์ครับ 39%แล้วก็แอฟริกาใต้ 30%ครับ ทำเนียบขาวระบุนะครับว่าเป้าหมายของภาษีก็คือการกระตุ้นการผลิตในประเทศแล้วก็ปกป้องอุตสาหกรรมของสหรัฐโดยระบบการเก็บภาษีใหม่นี้เนี่ยก็จะเป็นไปตามคำมั่นสัญญาของคุณทรัมป์นะครับที่บอกว่าจะใช้เครื่องมือภาษีเป็นเครื่องมือในการสร้างความมั่งคั่งครับนักวิเคราะห์ก็ประเมินนะครับว่าตอนนี้สิ่งที่ตลาดเฝ้ารออยู่ก็คือความชัดเจนครับว่าสินค้าที่เป็น transshipment อย่างที่พี่แบงค์บอกเนี่ยนะครับจะถูกเก็บในรายการคิดยังไงถูกเก็บ สัดส่วนเท่าไหร่แล้วก็จะมีวิธีในการ track ยังไงว่าสินค้าไหนเป็น transshipment หรือไม่นอกจากนี้นะครับก็มีความพร้อมนะครับของหน่วยงานต่างๆเนี่ยอย่างเช่นกรมศุลกากรก็บอกว่าพร้อมประกาศใช้ภาษีนี้ทันทีโดยให้มีผลตั้งแต่วันนี้ครับหน่วยงานนี้นะครับจะเพิ่มมาตรการในการตรวจสอบแหล่งกำเนิดสินค้าแล้วก็ระบุรายการสินค้าอย่างเข้มงวดซึ่งผู้นำเข้าจะต้องพิสูจน์ให้ได้ว่ามีความระมัดระวังอย่างเหมาะสมนะครับในการตีความแล้วก็ประกาศแหล่งที่มาของสินค้าอย่างถูกต้องครับผู้นำเข้าสินค้าของสหรัฐอเมริกาเนี่ยยอมรับนะครับว่าความไม่แน่นอนของกฎระเบียบที่จะต้องมาระบุว่าสินค้าไหนเนี่ยเป็นสินค้าที่มีต้นกำเนิดอย่างไรจะเป็นเรื่องที่ต้องใช้ความพยายามในการระบุให้ชัดเจนแล้วก็สิ่งก่อนหน้านี้นะครับเคยมีกรณีเรื่องของเหล็กแล้วก็อลูมิเนียมเนี่ยที่ถูกเก็บภาษีเหมือนกันผู้นำเข้าก็บอกว่ามีตัวเลขที่เสียหายขาดทุนนะครับเพราะว่าระบบเนี่ยยังคงมีความคลาดเคลื่อนอยู่ทำให้หลายๆคนครับต้องระมัดระวังนะครับเรื่องของการประกาศเรื่องของอัตราภาษีแล้วก็เรื่องของตัวเลขแหล่งที่มาในการนำเข้าสินค้าด้วยครับโดยสำนักข่าว BBC เขาก็วิเคราะห์กันเนี่ยนะครับเขาบอกว่าการที่สหรัฐประกาศเก็บภาษีแบบนี้ครับสิ่งที่จะตามมาก็คือต้นทุนที่กำลังจะเกิดขึ้นครับ โดยในตอนนี้แม้ว่าผลกระทบทางเศรษฐกิจจะไม่เกิดขึ้นทันทีแต่ในระยะยาวแล้วเนี่ยจะมีผลกระทบที่ตามมาจากราคาสินค้าที่ปรับตัวเพิ่มสูงขึ้นโดยตอนนี้นะครับข้อตกลงการค้าที่เกิดขึ้นเนี่ยยังคงขาดรายละเอียดเชิงลึกตามมาตรฐานการเจรจาในอดีตประเทศที่ไม่ได้ให้ข้อแลกเปลี่ยนนะครับมักจะถูกเก็บภาษีสูงกว่าแล้วก็ประเทศที่เจรจาได้ถูกเก็บภาษีต่ำกว่าแต่ความไม่ชัดเจนครับยังคงมีอยู่ทำให้ตลาดเองกังวลเรื่องของต้นทุนที่เพิ่มสูงขึ้น โดยคุณสกอตต์เบเซนนะครับบอกว่าการเก็บภาษีในครั้งนี้เนี่ยจะทำให้เกิดรายได้เข้ารัฐบาลประมาณ$300,000,000,000ในปีนี้สำนักข่าว BBC ก็บอกนะครับว่าภาษีที่เก็บเนี่ยจะทำให้ความต้องการบริโภคลดน้อยลงและบั่นทอนบรรยากาศการค้าของโลกโดยเยอรมนีอาจจะสูญเสียการเติบโตประมาณ 0.5% จากภาษีที่ถูกเก็บ 15% ในอุตสาหกรรมยานยนต์อินเดียนะครับแม้ว่าจะถูกเก็บภาษีสูงถึง 25%แต่ผลกระทบอาจจะไม่สูงเพราะว่าอินเดียมีการส่งออกนะครับพึ่งพาสหรัฐเพียง 2% ของ GDP เท่านั้นขณะที่บางบริษัทครับอย่าง Apple เนี่ยก็ยังคง หันไปผลิตสินค้านะครับในอินเดียกับจีนอยู่เพื่อขายนะครับในประเทศที่เป็นคู่ค้าแล้วก็นอกจากนี้นะครับผลกระทบทางการเมืองเนี่ยก็ยังมีเรื่องของความมั่นใจของผู้บริโภคนะครับที่ตอนนี้เราเห็นบริษัทยักษ์ใหญ่อย่าง Unilever แล้วก็ Adidas เนี่ยเตือนว่าจะมีช็อคหรือว่าราคาจะปรับตัวเพิ่มขึ้นมาในเร็วๆนี้แล้วถ้าหากว่าราคาสินค้าปรับตัวสูงเกินไปอาจจะส่งผลให้คุณทรัมป์นะครับไม่สามารถกดดันให้เฟดลดดอกเบี้ยได้อย่างที่ต้องการ แล้วก็จะกระทบกับความเชื่อมั่นของผู้บริโภคในประเทศด้วยทำเนียบขาวนะครับจึงต้องใช้มาตรการในการช่วยเหลือเบื้องต้นก่อนก็คือมีการแจกเช็คนะครับช่วยเหลือครอบครัวคนที่มีรายได้น้อยเพื่อเป็นการชดเชยผลกระทบจากราคาสินค้าที่เพิ่มสูงขึ้นแต่ก็ต้องขอสภาคองเกรสอนุมัติเรื่องนี้นะครับทำให้ชาวอเมริกันเนี่ยอาจจะต้องจ่ายภาษีจ่ายราคาสินค้าเพิ่มเติมนะครับแล้วก็ถ้าหากว่านโยบายนี้ยังคงมีความไม่ชัดเจนสุดท้ายระยะยาวทางนักวิเคราะห์จาก BBC ก็มองว่า อาจจะกระทบกับการเติบโตของเศรษฐกิจสหรัฐแล้วก็การเติบโตของเศรษฐกิจโลกได้ครับ
โอเคผมวิเคราะห์ข่าวเรื่องนี้อย่างนี้มีเรื่องหนึ่งนะก็คือไปอ่านเจอมาเขาก็บอกว่ามันอาจจะไม่ได้จบแค่วันที่1 สิงหาเพราะว่าภาษีทรัมป์เนี่ยประกาศไปแล้วแต่ว่ารายละเอียดเนี่ยมันยังมีไม่มากพอให้ทั้งฝั่งรัฐหรือผู้ที่ดำเนินการดำเนินการตามให้ทันนะครับเขาบอกว่าโปรแกรมของศุลกากรสหรัฐที่ชื่อว่า ACE เนี่ยยังไม่ได้รับคำสั่งจากทำเนียบขาวอย่างเป็นรายลักษณ์อักษรซึ่งก็ต้องเป็น Executive Order ของคุณทรัมป์นี่แหละคือไปตั้งกำแพงภาษีกับคนอื่นก็จริง แต่สุดท้ายแล้วศุลกากรของสหรัฐจะเก็บภาษีได้จริงก็คือต้องมีคำสั่งมาให้เก็บด้วยไม่ใช่ไปบอกว่าตั้งเขาอย่างเดียวเพราะไม่งั้นระบบมันก็ไม่ถูกรองรับแล้วก็บอกว่าคราวนี้มันจะใช้อัตราไหนเนี่ยมันก็ต้องรอหลัง1 สิงหาเนี่ยจริงๆแล้วคราวนี้เซ็นไปหลายฉบับด้วยบางฉบับก็เซ็นแล้วทับกันก็ต้องเอามาล้างกันอีกทีหนึ่งว่าไอ้ข้อมูลอะไรอัปเดตสุดผลตอนนี้ที่เกิดขึ้นจริงๆก็คือว่า มีผู้นำเข้าสินค้าหลายรายนะตอนนี้ระงับการซื้อสินค้าไปแล้วในช่วงสัปดาห์2 สัปดาห์ที่ผ่านมาเพราะไม่รู้ว่าอัตราภาษีเนี่ยจะโดนเท่าไหร่แล้วก็มีแล้วก็มีอีกแบบหนึ่งก็คือที่ยังรับออเดอร์เข้ามาในอเมริกาเองก็มีแตกชิปเมนต์แตกเป็นล็อตอะสมมุติว่าซื้อปกติซื้อล็อตใหญ่แตกออกเป็น3-4ล็อตกระจายบินเพราะว่ากลัวว่าเวลาโดนภาษีทีอาจจะโดนก้อนโตแล้วเดี๋ยวอาจจะมีปัญหางั้นกระจายบินไว้ก่อนนะครับ แล้วก็ซอฟต์แวร์ของศุลกากรหลายเจ้าเนี่ยก็คือของข้างหลายรัฐข้างในอเมริกาเองเนี่ยยังไม่พร้อมบางรายเนี่ยยังใช้ระบบที่ยอมรับรายการภาษียังผิดอยู่เลยยังไม่รู้ตัวซึ่งมีความเสี่ยงว่าสมมุติว่าขายสินค้าไปแล้วปล่อยผ่านไปแล้วอาจจะต้องไปเรียกเก็บภาษีย้อนหลังซึ่งมันอาจจะกลายเป็นว่าไปรบกวนกับผู้ที่นำผู้ส่งออกสินค้าที่เอาสินค้าเข้าไปขายในอเมริกาอีกทีหนึ่ง เพราะฉะนั้นตอนนี้คนในวงการโลจิสติกเนี่ยเขาพูดกันว่ามันไม่ใช่แค่เรื่องของการกรอกเอกสารแล้วแต่มันเป็นเรื่องของว่าตอนนี้เขาตัวแม้แต่ผู้นำเข้าในสหรัฐเองก็ต้องกลายเป็นคอนซัลท์ให้กับลูกค้าก็คือผู้ที่ส่งสินค้าเข้ามาเนี่ยว่าหาทางในการลดภาษีชะลอภาษีเลี่ยงภาษียังไงก็ได้ให้ถูกกฎหมายกลายเป็นอยู่ดีๆก็มีงานเพิ่มนะครับผู้นำเข้าก็เลยตอนนี้ก็สรุปก็คือกำลังงงกับกฎของทรัมป์ว่า ไม่เข้าใจว่าจะต้องทำตัวยังไง คือไม่เข้าใจว่าแล้วระบบก็ยังไม่พร้อม แล้วตัวเองต้องเสียภาษีแบบไหน ต้องทำยังไง ที่กังวลมากกว่าการจ่ายแพงคือตัวกลัวตัวเองจะทำผิด แล้วกลายเป็นจะต้องไปเสียค่าปรับ อันนี้ก็คือสิ่งที่กำลังจะเกิดขึ้นตามมานะคือโลจิสติกโลกเนี่ยกำลังปั่นป่วน แต่ว่าเราก็เห็นมาก่อนหน้านี้แล้วว่า IMF เนี่ยมีการปรับประมาณการตัวคาดการณ์ GDP ของโลกนะทั้งปีนี้แล้วก็ปีหน้าเพิ่มขึ้นจากการที่นี่แหละมีการตุนสินค้านำเข้าสินค้าและวัตถุดิบให้เยอะๆขึ้นก่อนที่จะมีอ่าก่อนที่จะตัวภาษีจริงเนี่ยจะเกิดขึ้นก็ต้องมาดูว่า IMF เนี่ยคาดการณ์ถูกหรือเปล่าตรงนี้ก็จะเป็นความวุ่นวายในเฟสถัดไปที่เราจะเจอตามมานั่นก็คือภาษีที่เก็บจริงนั้นเก็บได้จริงไหม ระบบมาตรการซอฟต์แวร์ของรัฐแล้วก็ผู้ที่นำเข้าภาษีเนี่ยจ่ายภาษีได้ถูกต้องจริงหรือเปล่าอันนี้คือเกมถัดมาเกมถัดไปก็คือเมื่อทุกคนรู้แล้วภาษีว่าเป็นยังไงประเทศที่มีอัตราภาษีที่ใกล้เคียงกันผมคิดว่าจะเข้าสู่สงครามถัดไปนั่นก็คือสงครามค่าเงินพี่ปั๊บนั่นก็คืออ้าวก็ในเมื่อสมมุตินะฉันโดนเวียดนามโดน20ไทยโดน19 เพราะฉะนั้นจะแข่งกับสหรัฐให้ได้ดีกว่านี้ค่าเงินต้องอ่อนไหมถ้าค่าเงินอ่อนทำยังไงให้อ่อนซึ่งสหรัฐเขาก็จะมีการมอนิเตอร์เรื่องนี้อยู่แล้วนะเป็นเรื่องปกติที่เขาก็จะบอกว่าเฮ้ยประเทศไหน manipulate หรือว่าคือเขาเรียกว่าปกป้องค่าเงินตัวเองมากเกินไปหรือเปล่าซึ่งเกมนี้ก็จะเป็นอีกเกมหนึ่งที่เราต้องมาดูกันซึ่งบาทเราเนี่ยตั้งแต่ต้นปีมานะพาไปดูกราฟหน่อยบาทเราเนี่ยตั้งแต่ต้นปีมาเนี่ยโอ้โหเราแข็งค่ามากๆนะตั้งแต่ปีต้นปีเราอยู่แถวๆประมาณสัก34.7เราลงมาเนี่ยลงมาถึงจุดต่ำสุดของเมื่อตอนเดือนตุลาปีที่แล้วเลยคือแถวๆ32.1ก่อนที่เราจะค่อยเนี่ยกลับมาเริ่มกลับมาอ่อนค่าตอนนี้อยู่ที่32.8อยู่นะตอนนี้ดูจากดีลที่เราได้ถ้าเราได้แบบนี้จริงๆเนี่ย38.2ผมคิดว่ายังไม่พอผมอยากเห็นอ่อนกว่านี้ผมอยากเห็นอ่อนทะลุ33ขึ้นไปถ้าอย่างเงี้ยการส่งออกเนี่ยอาจจะมีสิทธิ์แล้วก็เซ็ตบ้านเรานะเซ็ตอินเด็กซ์อาจจะมีโอกาสเหมือนกันว่าขึ้นไปทดสอบเส้นค่าเฉลี่ย200วันอยากให้ผ่านเหมือนกันเพราะว่าอย่าลืมนะเรา call set HD กันไปผมคิดว่าโซนผมให้คุณเรทีม investment ของเราเนี่ยลองดูว่าเฮ้ยซื้อตอนเนี้ย set HD yield ยังอยู่ที่เท่าไหร่ตอนนี้ yield เรายังได้ทะลุ 6% อยู่นะนั้นในมุมของผมก็คือถ้าตลาดตอบรับเรื่องของ 19% ในแง่ดีนะถือต่อแล้วแถมซื้อเพิ่มใน set HD ด้วยเพราะดูประเทศดูจะมีความหวังเพิ่มขึ้นนะครับ
ครับแล้วเดี๋ยวเรามาดูต่อนะครับเรื่องของกลยุทธ์การลงทุนกันบ้างครับโดยในช่วงนี้นะครับปัจจัยสำคัญที่นักลงทุนเฝ้ารอกันก็คือการประกาศผลประกอบการของบริษัทจดทะเบียนนะครับหลังจากที่เราทราบข่าวดีเรื่องตัวเลขการค้านะครับยอดภาษีที่จะถูกเก็บกันในแต่ละประเทศแล้วเนี่ยจะเห็นว่าในช่วงที่ผ่านมาตลาดหุ้นสหรัฐก็ยังคงเดินหน้าปรับตัวขึ้นมาได้อย่างแข็งแกร่งนะครับนำมาโดยหุ้นในกลุ่มเทคโนโลยีครับ สาเหตุสำคัญก็เป็นเพราะว่าการประกาศผลประกอบการในรอบนี้เนี่ยบ่งชี้ให้เห็นถึงเทรนด์สำคัญที่หลายๆบริษัทยังคงมุ่งเน้นนะครับลงทุนในธุรกิจที่เกี่ยวข้องกับ AI แล้วก็บอกว่าจะมีการทุ่มงบลงทุนไม่อั้นเลยครับจะเห็นได้จากบริษัทเทคยักษ์ใหญ่อย่าง Microsoft นะครับ Alphabet Meta Amazon เนี่ยต่างรายงานผลประกอบการเห็นการเติบโตที่แข็งแกร่งโดยมีปัจจัยหลักก็คือ AI นะครับเข้ามาขับเคลื่อนการเติบโตของบริการคลาวด์ไม่ว่าจะเป็นการทำ Data Center หรือแม้แต่อย่าง Meta นะครับบอกว่าเอาเข้ามาช่วยในการ optimize หรือว่าบริหารจัดการโฆษณาให้มีประสิทธิภาพมากขึ้นหรือว่า Alphabet นะครับ Google เองก็บอกเอา AI มาช่วยเรื่องของการค้นหาทำให้ประสิทธิภาพดีขึ้นขายมีรายได้มากขึ้นแล้วก็มีต้นทุนที่ต่ำลงไป ทำให้หลายบริษัทเหล่านี้ครับยังคงมุ่งเน้นทุ่มงบประมาณลงทุนใน AI นะครับโดย Microsoft เนี่ยบอกว่าจะใช้เงินกว่า 30,000 ล้านดอลลาร์ลงทุนในอุตสาหกรรม AI Alphabet นะครับก็บอกว่าจะเพิ่มงบลงทุนทั้งหมดนะครับจากทั้งปีนี้จากเดิม 75,000 เป็น 85,000 ล้านดอลลาร์แล้วก็ Meta ครับจะบอกว่าจะใช้เงินเพิ่มอีกประมาณ 2,000 ล้านดอลลาร์นะครับจะลงทุนใน AI อีกประมาณ 70,000 ล้านดอลลาร์ครับทำให้ตอนนี้นะครับทุกคนครับต่างมุ่งเน้นไปที่การลงทุนในอุตสาหกรรม AI แล้วก็จะเห็นว่าคนที่ใช้งานนะครับไม่เป็น Microsoft Azure AI Copilot นะครับต่างมีผู้ใช้งานเพิ่มมากขึ้นแต่ระดับ100ล้านคนแล้วอย่าง AI ของ Copilot เนี่ยนะครับก็บอกว่าใช้งานผลิตภัณฑ์ต่างๆรวมกันตอนนี้800ล้านคนไปเป็นที่เรียบร้อยแล้วครับส่วนในฝั่งของโซเชียลมีเดียนะครับ Meta ก็บอกว่าธุรกิจโฆษณาครับใช้ AI เข้ามาบริหารจัดการเอามาเลือกนะครับปรับอัลกอริทึมให้ส่งโฆษณาเนี่ยตรงกับกลุ่มเป้าหมายมากยิ่งขึ้น ทำให้ยอดขายโฆษณาก็ดีขึ้นอย่างต่อเนื่องนะครับรายได้ของส่วนนี้ก็จะปรับตัวเพิ่มขึ้นมากลายเป็นว่า AI เนี่ยกลายมาเป็นเครื่องจักรการเติบโตใหม่ของบริษัทเทคโนโลยีเหล่านี้ครับโดยนักลงทุนนะครับแม้ว่าจะเห็นตัวเลขการใช้จ่ายที่เพิ่มสูงขึ้นมาแต่ก็ยังยิ่งกลับมีความมั่นใจครับทำให้เราเห็นเม็ดเงินจำนวนมากที่เข้าไปลงทุนในอุตสาหกรรมเทคโนโลยียักษ์ใหญ่นะครับสะท้อนจากการลงทุนใน AI แล้วก็ผลตอบแทนของบริษัทเหล่านี้ก็ปรับตัวเพิ่มขึ้นมาด้วยนะครับนักวิเคราะห์จาก Reuters ก็บอกว่านี่อาจจะเป็นจุดเริ่มต้นของยุคใหม่นะครับที่ AI เนี่ยไม่ได้
จนฟันเหลืองต้องขจัดให้ขาววิ้งหอมมิ้นท์ด้วยดาลี่เบกกิ้งโซดา
Monday.com's AI blocks are a total game changer.
Excuse me if I find that hard to believe.
You know that llamas are biologically incapable of lying, right?
Does that come with knowledge?
Monday.com's AI blocks are designed to specifically help you at your work.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. This is the close.
You can focus on trade, you can focus on the Fed, or you can focus on AI. Live from Studio 2 here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York, I'm Romaine Bostick.
And I'm Katie Greifeld. We're kicking you off to the closing bell here in the U.S. A totally different song I'm singing than I was at 9:30 this morning, because you take a look at the fade in this market. The S&P 500 now flat to maybe a little bit down. Remember, we were higher by about 1% just a couple of hours ago. A similar story when you take a look at big tech. Of course, Meta and Microsoft still higher on the day. We've got some important reports after the bell, but the big tech index down slightly. The bond market not doing too much, not much of a haven bid underway for the long end. 10-year treasury yields pretty much flat. If you are looking for some risk appetite, Romaine, maybe you're finding it in Bitcoin, higher by just about 0.5% right now.
And we came in today with a lot of risk appetite. The red on your screen seems to be tied to some news out of Washington on pharmaceuticals, but big tech really sort of put a buffer under this market to start the day. Microsoft and Meta actually powered the market to fresh record highs intraday. The two companies spending hundreds of billions of dollars on AI, but investors, they don't really seem to mind, since that CapEx spend, we should point out, is actually coming from available cash rather than borrowing, and it's cash that for the first time in a long time is being heavily reinvested in the company's futures rather than just frittered away on buybacks and dividends.
Essentially, our view is you sort of stay with the AI theme. It's worked. Obviously, it's working this morning. It's going to continue to work. But owning some protection beneath is really wise, particularly when you think about it in the backdrop of how much these names have already outperformed.
Nevertheless, those two big tech names did provide a sense of euphoria on the markets, one that has been bubbling for some time, one that has unlocked the IPO market. CoreWeave set the tone with its wildly successful March IPO. That was followed by Mountain in May, stablecoin company Circle in June, and today, on the final day of July, its app development company Figma, storming through the gates, 40 times oversubscribed in an intraday high, more than triple its $33 offer price. We should point out that the number of non-SPAC IPOs in the U.S. is now firmly above pre-pandemic levels, and that's putting quite a bow in what has been a phenomenal month of July for stocks that included a 3% move in the Russell 2000 small caps, the NASDAQ 100 tech stocks, and the broad benchmark S&P, which notched 10 record highs prior to today over the course of the month.
Yeah, it has been quite a month. As you mentioned, it's the final trading day of July, so I thought we'd take a look at the dollar. The dollar has been one of the most interesting assets to track this year. That did not change in July because it actually notched its biggest gain as measured by the Bloomberg Dollar Index since December of last year. You can see we're coming off of 6 straight months of declines for the dollar index. That has been definitely a story that's percolated through all of the asset classes. But in July, actually notching a gain of 2.6% for the dollar index. The question, of course, Romaine, is whether or not this is sustainable.
Kara Murphy joins us right now to kick us off to the close, CIO over at Kestra Investment Management. And Kara, I will start off by stealing Katie's question about the sustainability and durability of what we're seeing out there.
Well, when we look back over the last 10 years, you're talking about the dollar, there's been this incredible strength in the dollar that's really underpinned a lot of U.S. assets. Then you get to the first half of this year where suddenly the dollar starts to turn down. Now, the decline in the dollar has not been massive when you compare, other big moves in the dollar over time. But I think it does signal somewhat of a shift in that for many years, the S&P 500 was the most dominant, best performing asset class. And suddenly owning things outside of the S&P 500 actually matter. Whether that's assets out, like stocks outside the US, whether that's bonds. And we're calling 2025 the year of diversification, where owning things outside the S&P 500 is certainly a positive for your portfolio.
I am curious, though. I mean, and I've heard a lot of talk about the diversification outside of U.S. assets, not necessarily abandoning U.S. assets, but just providing a little bit more of a buffer. Why don't you think, though, we're seeing more of that? Because when you look at the data, a lot of people are still crowded into those narrow U.S.-focused trades.
And 100%. And there's actually a really good fundamental story for U.S. assets, right? You were talking earlier about AI, productivity kind of filtering around the broader U.S. economy. U.S. economic growth has been really strong. So there are really strong, good fundamental underpinnings for like the U.S. large cap growth story. The question is how much of that is already priced into those stocks. We look at valuations. They're among the highest levels that we've seen in 25 years. Much, much higher than some of our partners outside the US. And at some point, that growth story starts to narrow. And with that, the valuation differential starts to narrow between those two parts of the world.
Let's talk about valuations a little bit more, because heading into the tech earnings season, of course, as always has been the case for the past few seasons, there's this really close focus on AI spend, on CapEx. We heard from Microsoft and Meta still committed to those big figures. But when you overlay that with the valuations of some of these companies, I mean, how much do you need a return on investment here?
I think expectations are really high. I mean, if you look broadly at corporate earnings growth, Q1 to Q2, growth certainly slowed. And we saw that confirmed in Q2 GDP data that came out, I believe it was yesterday. Now, as we look through earnings season, we're, about a little over a third of the way through it. What you see are the number of companies that are beating are about in line with historical averages. But where we see profit margins increasing is largely concentrated within tech companies and communication services. And a lot of that is what you're suggesting with the AI story. So I think an important piece of the story is that those companies are able to continue delivering earnings at the same time that they're reinvesting for future growth. Now, as you suggested, they're going to have to prove those returns over time because expectations have gotten really high. But for the moment, they've convinced investors that the ability to get those returns are there.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems to be for the moment that is the case. We'll see how many more quarters that holds. But also one of the undercurrents of this earnings season is, of course, what's going on with trade policy, what's going on with tariffs. I think about a Texas Instruments, I think it was last week or the week before, saying that they actually weren't certain how much of the strength that they saw in the previous quarter was due to a pull forward, people trying to get ahead of tariffs. I know that that's one of the questions going into Apple results tonight, Kara, and I wonder how you think about those two factors in connection with each other, the actual fundamental results that we're getting and the uncertainty of how tariffs are impacting those numbers.
So I think investors have accepted the fact that there was a lot of tariff noise in the second quarter. And again, we saw this very clearly through Q1 and Q2 GDP, where there was clearly a pull forward in demand. Consumers and companies were buying ahead of tariffs, raising inventories, and then Q2, that demand slowed as people worked down those inventories. And you gave a few examples of companies that are sort of living through that. So I think that noise can be accepted in the past as long as we have some stability going forward. And what the market has priced in right now is that, yes, there'll be tariffs ahead, but they're not going to be that negative for company earnings as a whole. Certainly, there are going to be individual companies. I know the automakers have really been in the crosshairs of sort of where they fall in this tariff question. But overall, when it comes to the market is pricing in right now that the administration is not willing to accept a recession in exchange for its tariff policy or any other policy. As long as that holds, I think the market can hang in, minus a few companies that have to sort of dance around that. But with that, the sort of noise of tariffs recedes a bit into the background, which is a good thing.
Kara, always a pleasure. Kara Murphy, Chief Investment Officer at Kestra Investment Management, kicking us off to the close here on this Thursday afternoon with the eye on the IPOs today. We should point out one of the biggest one-day pops that we've seen so far this year. That was in Circle at the start of June. Looks like that's going to be eclipsed today by Figma. We're going to talk to Erica Brescia, Managing Director over at Red Point Ventures, about her expectations for that company and the rest of the IPO pipeline.
And speaking of tech, we'll speak to Alger CEO Dan Chung, whose firm owns stock in all of the banged up 7 names, as Apple and Amazon results are due later this evening.
And with an eye on those Amazon results, we're going to talk about the company's retail segment. Remember that? Remember when it just used to be an e-commerce business?
Huh.
Well, apparently competition is heating up in that space. We're going to talk to Carney partner Catherine Black. Stick with us. A lot more coming up here on The Close. This is Bloomberg.
Well, Figma shares absolutely soaring by more than 150% on their first day of trading, now trading at about $107 a share after pricing at $33. Now, the design software company making its public debut under the ticker FIG.
Here's what CEO Dylan Field told Bloomberg TV earlier today.
I think it's not just that Figma is going public today. Design is going public today. I think we're now in a world where design is the differentiator. That's been our thesis for 10 years. We've seen it play out, but it's even more clear now that design, craft, point of view, that's what sets companies apart.
Joining us now to discuss is Erica Brescia. She is managing director over at Red Point Ventures. Her firm invests in tech and has backed companies with IPOs and M&As such as Snowflake, DraftKings, Netflix, and him and her. So an impressive resume there. Erica, I know that this was a hotly anticipated IPO, but with that being said, are you surprised by just the open arms exception that we're seeing today?
Honestly, it has exceeded even our expectations, I think, on how well this would go. It's fantastic to see. I mean, Figma is an incredible company, as everybody well knows by this point in time. And I think there was a lot of excitement and anticipation around what would happen today. It's even higher than I expected it to come out. And congrats to Dylan and the whole Figma team.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are surprised by some of the numbers that we're seeing right now. And of course, the natural question that follows is, what does this mean for the other companies in the pipeline right now? That has been the question, when we're going to see a really robust return to maybe some more normal levels. We're starting to get there, but an IPO like this, Erica, I have to imagine that that helps some of these companies along.
I think it does. I mean, you've had companies like Databricks who have been waiting in the wings for a while, a fantastic business, also growing at, 50% year over year. I think they were at 3.7 billion in revenue run rate, and they are profitable. And as was Figma, like, you have some flexibility in terms of when you go out. And I think everybody's been waiting to see what would happen in the markets and how Circle and this IPO would be received. And obviously, seeing the very positive reception should have a positive impact on, the timing of future IPOs.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, you bring up profitability. I mean, there was a lot of talk when it became clear that they were going to become public, that this would be one of the few companies that actually did have profitability, including on a net income basis, and more importantly, still had a relatively healthy growth rate. And I am curious on the revenue side, and I am curious about that aspect of it, because everyone I spoke to seemed to really focus in on that idea that the analyst community modeling something like 30 to 40% growth for at least the next couple of years. And it's hard to find certainly any software company, and certainly not a mature one, that can actually compete at that same growth rate.
Yeah, I think Palantir is the only other public software company that's growing at that kind of a rate. As I mentioned, Databricks has been too. So I think, we're still seeing very, very healthy growth in these private companies that are preparing to go public. And I think as they come to market, we'll see that continue to be the case. These companies have been expertly navigated through the changing AI landscape thus far, and I certainly have very high confidence in their executive teams to be able to continue to do so.
When you look at the pipeline of potential IPOs, the ones that are in the private space, potentially going public, including maybe some of the ones that Redpoint has a stake in, what is the quality overall, Erica, of those companies?
I think it's exceptionally high, and that's part of the reason these companies have been able to remain private for as long as they have. You take Stripe, a Redpoint portfolio company, or Databricks, and they have had the luxury of access to capital in the private markets at fantastic terms because they are running exceptionally good businesses. And so they have all the power about when they go out to market, and they're going to look to, the Figma IPO and any others to come to see how those are received by the market. And they're going to go out at their own pace when it makes sense for their business, because they really don't need to. Yeah,
that's the thing. And to that point, Erica, I wonder if it's your opinion that something fundamental has changed in the way that companies fund themselves. I mean, a Stripe doesn't necessarily have to go public. To your point, you think about a SpaceX, which I know isn't a portfolio company of yours. That's another company that can get all the funding it needs pretty much in the private markets. Do you think that we have entered a new regime where some of these companies are just going to stay private forever?
Forever is a very long period of time. I don't have that kind of a crystal ball. I wish I did. But I think they will remain private for longer and longer. And again, they're going to go public at a time that it makes sense for their business. It could be to make a strategic statement to the market. It certainly is a huge win for employees and has a material impact on morale it can improve access to, the capital markets. Obviously, it gives them more options. And so, I think that there are still very good reasons to IPO, and we'll see companies do that at a point that it makes sense for them. I think anything that can be done to smooth the way for that to happen, we do have a pretty intense regulatory environment, and seeing some of those restrictions relaxed potentially and the cost of going public come down could have an impact as well on some of these businesses and their choice to do so.
Erica, really appreciate you taking time for us. Erica, and hopefully we can talk to you soon when some of your portfolio companies hit the tape. Erica Brescia is Managing Director over at Red Point Ventures. A closer look at Figma. And Katie, this is pretty phenomenal. We're talking about an IPO at $33 last night, open today at $85, intraday high of 116. And I was just going through the data on the terminal. If it holds these gains, biggest first day pop for an IPO this year, for a major IPO this year.
It's just amazing. And if I were to put on my Matt Miller hat, which I don't do that often.
Yeah, that's like a trucker hat.
He would be pounding the table right now about how the bankers left money on the table, but I'll let other people
Can I
argue
just say, I know our viewers don't know this, we'll go behind the fourth wall, but sort of right behind these cameras is where my desk sits. So I get to hear Matt Miller pounding the table all the time about money being left on the table. You know what?
Yeah.
Dylan Field's making out pretty good. And
Yeah,
you know what?
I
He has
think
an
he's a happy
equity
man.
stake, so a 200-something% pop in the stock.
Yeah,
I think
these are
he's gonna
really
be all right.
champagne problems that we're talking about here.
First world problems here. Well, speaking of which here, we talk about hot IPOs. Coinbase, which believe it or not was actually one of the worst performing IPOs during its 2021 class, has really perked up over the last 4 months, more than doubling in price, and they're set to report earnings after the bell tonight. We're going to discuss what to expect when we come back. This is The Close on Bloomberg. All right, let's get right to our top calls. Big movers on the back of analyst recommendations. And we start off today with Novo Nordisk, the maker of the weight loss drug Wegovy. HSBC, which reiterated its buy rating on the stock just 3 months ago, says it got it wrong, citing recent execution hiccups and abrupt management changes, downgrading to hold, slashing the price target by more than 40%. Those shares down 3% as it continues to slide back down to its lowest since 2022. Next up, eBay. BMO upgrading the online auction company to outperform, raising the price target to a street high 102 from $70. This following the company's second quarter results. The analyst cites accelerating growth and new opportunities in advertising eBay at a record high. And finally, CoreWeave. Citigroup closing its negative catalyst watch on the cloud software stock and upgrading to buy with a 160 price target. The analyst says Microsoft's earnings yesterday gave him a stronger view that the AI demand ramp up for CoreWeave will continue. Those shares up 13% on the day. All right, we're also keeping an eye on Coinbase. Those shares fractionally higher on the day as the crypto platform prepares to report results after the bell. Devin Ryan joins us right now, Director of Financial Technology Research over at Citizens JMP. I believe the consensus estimate on the street is something like 10 to 11% growth in revenue. Is that what you're expecting, Devin?
We are, Romain. We're expecting, a good quarter year over year. I think trading volumes were down a little bit from the first quarter, but it's also going to be really noisy because you have that data breach charge, which you remember a couple months ago they had a data breach, and so that'll roll through results. And then on top of that, they're going to have a really nice gain related to their stake in Circle, which just came public in an IPO. So I think there's going to be a lot of noise in the actual headline result, but expecting, I think, a pretty good quarter. And then more importantly, everybody's going to be paying attention to what they say about the outlook for stable coins and tokenization and all the enthusiasm we're seeing in the market right now.
Yeah, and before we talk about that, I am curious about just trading activity overall. I mean, we heard from the big Wall Street banks, they really benefited from some of the market volatility out there when it comes to public equities and public debt. Did that volatility also provide a benefit for crypto platforms like Coinbase?
You would think that there might have been with the volatility that you just talked about, but there wasn't as much in the second quarter. And some of that was because you had such a surge in activity after the election, and that carried into the beginning of the year, kind of the first quarter, just on enthusiasm that we'd finally get kind of rules of the road. And then the second quarter was a little bit quieter, just around kind of new information coming to the market. And so I would actually say there was less activity. And so you'll see a decline in the second quarter. But interestingly, now that we had the Genius Act just recently signed, the data we're tracking is that July volumes for Coinbase are up around 30%, or actually even a little bit more than that. So I think you're going to hear about a little bit of a slower second quarter, and then third quarter thus far is tracking really nicely. And I think that sets the tone into the back half of the year, which is, again, what we're kind of focusing on.
Well, as we await these earnings, I do want to point out that Coinbase shares are up about 53% in 2025. But I see this line in your notes you wrote, actually, we continue to believe that Coinbase is misunderstood in the market. Obviously, shareholders seem to like it. Where do you see the disconnect?
Yeah, so we've been talking about this from really the beginning of when the company came public, that this company is much more than a place to buy and sell cryptocurrencies. Of course, they're the biggest platform in the US, but really they're building an ecosystem where firms that want to get access to using blockchain technology, whether that's stable coins or tokenizing all other types of assets and trading those assets, Coinbase is going to have their hand in that. They're going to be involved in payments and Web3. And so all these other iterations of how blockchain is used, Coinbase will have a connection to that. And that part of the business, subscription and services, is already roughly a third of revenues. It was virtually nothing 5 years ago, but I see that growing a lot faster than the exchange functionality. And so, the stock has done well, but these other pieces like the connection to stable coins and payments and tokenization, we're literally in the first inning of that. And I think that's really the story from here. And that's, if you're going to buy the stock here, you want to get excited about that. But I think there's really big upside related to those themes.
So you're making the point, of course, this isn't just a crypto exchange. It's more than just buying and selling different coins and tokens here. What does the competitive landscape look like right now? Who are Coinbase's biggest competitors at this point, and how do they stack up?
Yeah, it's a great question, because ultimately what's going to happen here is you're going to see convergence of kind of your traditional crypto-based companies, the exchanges, and firms that are building technology in that landscape, and then traditional financial services companies, exchanges, investment banks, traditional banks, and it's all converging. And the reason that's happening is because we're finally getting regulatory clarity, and that's actually, as I just made the case, I think a really good thing for Coinbase. So they're going to benefit from virtually all facets of crypto getting adopted. And so on one hand, volumes will grow, and I think that'll benefit them. On the other hand, spreads will compress as more competitors enter the market. And we're very comfortable with that because as you've seen over time, in financial services, as volumes grow, the leaders, and Coinbase has a pretty big competitive advantage in their technical expertise in a really technical industry. The leaders continue to take market share. And so that's ultimately what we think will happen here. And so more adoption, even with more competition, will be a boost for them.
All right, Devin, really appreciate the time and the preview. That is Devin Ryan. He is Director of Financial Technology Research over at Citizens JMP. And coming up moments away from Amazon and Apple earnings, we'll speak with Alger CEO Dan Chung about what to expect.
3:30 p.m. in a rainy New York City. This is the countdown to the close. I'm Romaine Bostic.
And I'm Katie Greifeld. And it's going to be hard to transition back into the market, but we should talk a little bit about the state of emergency in New York City right now. Apparently, pretty massive flooding expected.
Yeah, and we should point out, in all seriousness, the New York governor has declared a state of emergency. It's just started raining here, but there's a lot of expectations for heavy rains, flash flooding. Several of the train lines have already been suspended so far. And Katie, I believe you live somewhere that requires river transit. Are you going to be able to get home?
Yeah, I hope so. I'm definitely driving. I live in Hoboken, so we'll see. You're going uptown, so you're headed to higher ground. So
that's why you bought the house up there, top of the hill.
There you go. I'm ditching right at 410 though, so I hope that your commute home at 5 p.m. looks a lot better. If you're still watching on a television, maybe you should actually just pack up and go home right now. But after this conversation, because joining us live in studio, I'm thrilled to say we have Alger CEO Dan Chung. His firm owns the Mag 7 across its suite of growth-focused funds. First off, great to see you in person.
Thank you, Katie.
So let's start with a look back. I want to talk about Meta and Microsoft because kind of the overarching question over the past couple of earnings seasons is how much investor patience there is when it comes to CapEx, when it comes to seeing that ROI, and when does that patience actually run out? Given that you hold these names, I wonder how you're thinking about some of these big CapEx numbers that these companies are putting up.
Right. So I think it's still very early stages in AI. These are two of the biggest and best leaders in that space and have multiple ways to leverage it for a long, long time, years to come. Today's earnings were confirmation of, yes, the spending will continue, but Meta's numbers in particular Meta is one of the biggest users of AI across all of its advertising tools, and the results were spectacular. I mean, it's a $200 billion revenue company going 20% plus with better margins, even as they're spending all of what they are for Llama and AI. So it's a great example of the things to come and early days yet.
Are you on Meta? Are you surprised by the resurgence that we've seen in this company and for that matter the stock? Because I felt like a couple of years ago everybody was sort of poo-pooing them because of the bet on the metaverse, and prior to that they had the Cambridge Analytica and all those scandals, and this was a stock that everyone had just kind of pushed to the side.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It was kind of widely hated.
Yeah.
And has gone to being right on the money in a lot of its internal AI bets for driving advertising. I mean, people are saying that Llama 4 is behind those. But Mark Zuckerberg obviously is going heavy duty after AI experts across.
Yeah.
I mean, he's paying Tom Brady packages to engineers.
I'm thinking about applying there.
It's pretty.
And I know nothing about AI.
Yeah, maybe they'll find something, but it is just amazing looking at those pay packages. And just to stick on Meta for a little bit longer, I mean, I think about the year of efficiency all the time after they burned so much cash on the metaverse that they had to do a complete reset after 2022 and really tighten the belt. What distinguishes, in your minds, the metaverse from AI? Is it just that it seems like all of the Magnificent Seven is chasing the same puck?
Well, it's funny because as the metaverse goes, that's kind of faded.
Yeah.
And they focus basically on the core of their business, which is just advertising, social media. Although I will note the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, that franchise, I think the growth rate tripled there. So maybe that'll be the first big hit as a wearable. But basically, it did refocus on costs, but the best thing for a growth investor is they didn't do that exclusively. They also recognized the next big opportunity. So it wasn't the metaverse, but it is AI. It's AI driving their advertising, and AI driving, the golfers, super intelligence.
We just flashed some of your big holdings there. You've obviously had some huge winners, obviously Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA. Two on there, Amazon, which I do want to talk about, but I do want to get your thoughts on Apple, which has been a bit of a laggard. And the criticism seems to be that investors just don't know what the longer-term strategy is, what the AI strategy is, what the innovation strategy is. Do you have those same concerns?
So we do have concerns about Apple. I mean, this was once our top holding, and we are underweighted relative to the benchmark. But Apple, of course, is a very high-quality company, has great position as a as the iPhone and the iPad, and then in the device universe, to be an AI enabler for billions and billions of consumers. But it is behind in that race, and it is losing talent in that race. And right now, they're sort of in a bit of a lull that they don't have a particularly interesting product cycle ahead of them. So I'm definitely not counting them out. But as I said, we've gone from significant overweight top holding to underweight, a very big and good company, but nevertheless, trying to find its way.
You think about some of the cross currents coming at Apple. Of course, you have the AI narrative that they're an also-ran in that category. You have what's going on with tariffs, what their supply chain looks like. It just feels like sentiment is so sour on this stock. What would you need to see that would boost your holdings in this company?
I think we would need to see, first of all, an exciting product cycle, and that really is going to have to come with Siri becoming, the first AI chatbot that everybody has on their mobile phone. That would be the really thrilling thing. But we'd like to see just some improvement in Siri. Siri is lagging badly.
Yeah.
Somebody who uses it a lot, regrettably. I'm always actually kind of shocked, too, because to a certain extent, they were kind of a first mover in that space and kind of lagged. Before we let you go, I do have to get your thoughts on Amazon. They're also reporting after the bell. And I never really know how to characterize Amazon anymore. I mean, I know we kind of call it an e-commerce company, but that kind of shortchanges what this company really is.
Yeah, that's a great insight to it, because Amazon, we all need to focus on is the cloud services. AWS is, with Azure, those are the two biggest cloud services. And Microsoft's results in Azure cloud services was tremendous, acceleration on a huge base. AWS is even bigger and isn't growing quite as fast, but it is growing at a very fast rate for something so large. And it's hugely significant to Amazon's today and their future. But meanwhile, they also combine, they're a great example of a company that is both driving AI, but also as an adopter, because they have such a brick and mortars intensive, people-intensive, product-intensive business. As they use that to improve their efficiency, we see lots of productivity gains for them that could be tremendous.
All right, Dan, great to have you here in studio. That's the CEO of Alger, Dan Chung there. A nice preview of two big tech stocks that are going to report earnings after the bell. That includes Amazon up about 1% here in the cash session, and Apple down about 0.2%. Full coverage on the close after the bell on both of those names. Meanwhile, we take a look at some of the earnings across the wire earlier today, and that includes Norwegian Cruise Lines. That stock's sailing higher, buoyed by record bookings. You love the puns, Katie Greifeld? We got them all here on the close. This is Bloomberg. All right, let's take a look at shares of Norwegian Cruise Lines. It is our stock of the hour. The shares at one point hitting their highest level since February, now up 9% after the company says it's seen a rebound in bookings. Lizzie Dove joins us right now, U.S. leisure analyst in global investment research over at Goldman Sachs. And I do want to go back 3 or 4 months ago when the CEO came out and talked about some concern, about uncertainty, about choppiness in the market. And then he comes out today and basically says, hey, everything's great across all 3 of our major brands. You seeing the same trends, Lizzie?
Yeah, it's honestly incredible. I think, the choppiness in April is well understood, and there were clearly a lot of reasons for that. I will say that the challenges that Norwegian was seeing were more acute on the European side, which is more of that long haul, slightly higher end side of things. But now what they've seen as the macro has become a little bit less choppy, more of a higher consumer confidence, now things have rebounded, and July was a record month for Norwegian. So clearly things have turned around very nicely for them.
When you look at the guidance that they gave, particularly for the current quarter, $1.14 a share on the bottom line, which was actually a little bit lower than the average of analyst estimates. Is this one of those cases where it's kind of under promise, over deliver, or are you taking that 114 seriously?
I've taken the 114 seriously, and what I will say is that when you look at what they reported for EPS today, there was an 8 cents FX headwind, and so that was kind of impacting things a little bit. When you look at the go forward, though, actually things are on a really, really nice trajectory, and that's not for 2025, but that's for 2026 too. And I think that's what's key, and maybe some investors are missing, is the exit rate for 4Q is very, very strong. And with the bookings now at record levels, that's not about today. Those bookings are for tomorrow. And so really what it really paints the picture of is a very nice long-term runway.
Well, Lizzie, talking about those record bookings that we saw in July, what sticks out to me is that we heard Summer say on the call that the rebound was primarily from improved economic conditions, that it wasn't necessarily utilizing unusual promotions to boost and juice demand there. So that's not even a lever that they've pulled here.
Right, and I think that's what matters. And again, another thing that sometimes investors miss that is really, really key about cruise, and that is it is a great value proposition. It is still 20 to 25% cheaper to go on a cruise than it is to go on an equivalent land-based vacation. And so even in a choppier macro, consumers still want to take a vacation. And so even if they're choosier around how they spend their dollars, cruise is a great option because of that price gap, and that's without discounting, to your point.
I want to bring this conversation to what's been happening in the stock market, because you take a look at Norwegian shares with this boost that we're seeing today. They've just about erased year-to-date losses, but as you can see on the screen, still negative for the year. You compare that to Royal Caribbean, up double digits. Same thing, too, when you see Carnival. How does Norwegian actually close that gap? Do you see that as a possibility?
It's a great point, and I think today goes a long way in starting to close that gap, because what it gives is credibility, and that's credibility that there wasn't an issue on the brand side of things with Norwegian, that they aren't a shared donor, which was a fear that investors had, but actually things are on a very nice trajectory. Now, that being said, there is a key difference between Norwegian and Royal, and that is leverage. I mean, Norwegian is still over 5 turns levered. If you compare that to Royal, they're, investment grade, they're buying back stock, they have a dividend. So there's a reason for that multiple gap. But now with the credibility that Norwegian has and that long-term runway I mentioned, I think it can start to narrow.
And just finally, Lizzie, I am curious just overall about this strategy that the cruise lines have started to take with regards to building their own facilities, islands and other things off of the boat here. You see that as a viable strategy?
I think it's a great strategy. In fact, the private islands that the cruises already have launched, and there's more coming, as you say, they have the highest customer ratings out of any port across the globe. People love it. And I think part of it is the amenities that they have. It's water parks, it's beach bars, there's everything that you could want, and it's right when you step off that ship. And so it speaks to the convenience, and it speaks to the fact that the customer demographic is getting younger, there's families, and it appeals to everybody. So I think with more of those islands coming online over the next few years, that's another piece of the puzzle that helps cruise accelerate from here.
All right, Lizzie, got to leave it there. Really appreciate your time. That is Lizzie Dove. She is U.S. leisure analyst in global investment research over at Goldman Sachs.
When was the last time you were on a cruise?
Never.
Yeah,
have never been on a cruise.
Yeah, I've never had the, I don't know, is it a pleasure, privilege?
It doesn't surprise me
Pain?
that you're
don't
not
know.
a cruise person. And
Yeah, I don't like to be confined, you know?
Yeah, I fear the ocean.
I don't know. It's just like you're just out there.
Yeah,
And that's it.
No, I like to look at land, and I like to think about the closing bell as well. And that's what we're going to do up next with Sherry Paul, Managing Director and Private Wealth Advisor over at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. She's here for the closing bell. Don't go anywhere. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
10 minutes until we get to the closing bell. Romaine Bostic here alongside Katie Greifeld. We started the day, it looked like we were going to have a pretty sizable rally on our hands. The updraft that we were getting from Microsoft and Meta, but of course, some talk out of Washington took the market down, as has happened frequently.
Absolutely, a big hit to sentiment there, and you can see that reflected in the indexes right now. The S&P 500, we were higher by 1% earlier in the session. It looks like we're going to close out the month of July with losses right now. Losses coming from the tech sector with the NASDAQ 100. You have Microsoft and Meta hanging in there, but the rest of the sector not cooperating, not sending much of a haven bid into the bond market. You can see the 10-year Treasury yields down a little bit, but even Bitcoin is lower on the day.
Even
that is
Bitcoin.
your measure of risk appetite. Yeah, what are we going to do?
All right. Well, we should point out, too, you point out the tech stocks. Microsoft still up about 4% at that $4 trillion market cap, a record high. Meta up more than 10% on the day to yet another record high. And after the bell, we're going to get earnings out of Amazon and Apple. And, of course, everyone wants to know what the AI story is for all of these companies. Sherry Paul joins us right now to help us count you down to the closing bells. Private Wealth Advisor and Managing Director at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. All right, Sherry, the AI story has been the story for the last couple of years. It has also probably been one of the most criticized of the thematic trades out there. I don't know if yesterday with Meta and Microsoft ends up being that true inflection point. But when you look at the amount of money that they're spending, their commitment to continue spending that, and the idea that they're articulating an actual return on that spend, does that sort of mean that the critics maybe had it wrong?
Yeah, look, I think it's earnings the day that will live in infamy, that this is the moment that the skeptics have the information that they want, which is verifiable earnings. You know, for those of us that have been talking about this for several years, to your point, we were looking at it from an opportunistic innovation trade set within a once-in-a-generation lifetime industrial bull market, which by definition means that the entire world economy is about to reorder based on this technology, which is very different than what happened with the internet, because this is actually a tech that can be downloaded and installed in verified businesses that actually produce earnings to create earnings expansion and potentially, at a corporation's discretion, take away the most expensive cost, which is human labor. So this is a pivotal moment in our opinion, and we've been investing in the theme and will continue to do so.
And I've heard a lot of lofty predictions kind of comparing this to the Industrial Revolution or the advent of actual computer technologies in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, whether it lives up to that. I do want to draw an analogy to the dot-com boom, because when we all knew the internet, or most of us knew the internet was going to turn into something, but there was a lot of difficulty in picking who the winners were going to be. And most of us probably picked the companies that don't exist anymore, and we ignored the ones that are still standing today. How do you value AI going forward? Because it's so much money being spent, and you look at the multiples on some of these stocks, and to me, they just seem ridiculous. And so how do you sort of look at those multiples and say to yourself with confidence, don't worry, over time, this will make sense?
Well, you know, look, I love drawing the comparison because I had a front row seat to the internet, and you're right that I think that there was the infrastructure build out, not really sure what it was going to do and what it was for. It was a research tool in the beginning, and then it was, how is this going to turn into commerce beyond just social? We've gone through 3 different iterations, and then the pandemic hit. And that was really when, in our view, that the remote of everything came into play. I mean, at that time, I think it was less than 20% of Americans had ever remote deposited a check. Now we're doing high-stakes transactions, and we're trusting the tech more in the most intimate parts of the decisions that we're making. And so if you fast forward, we're at a moment, I really believe, where we're going from candlesticks to light bulbs. Wow. We're going from horse carriages to cars. And what's different about this is that I have a client who's building a house, and this is where individual clients, and remember, I'm a private wealth advisor, so I work with individual families that want to know, like, what are we going to do now? My responsibility is to find the corridor of investing opportunity in all market climates, not to wait it out. Right. Because waiting it out is not a strategy. And so the way that I'm explaining this to them, because it's hard, is, listen, if you know, the invention of the hammer, they're renovating a house. You know, oh, this is amazing. I can like hammer a nail and put 2 pieces of wood together. Well, now the hammer can do that on its own. Okay, and superintelligence says, wow, not only can the hammer do it on its own, the hammer at some point could look at the nail, the 2 pieces of wood, and go, ooh, I think I'm supposed to nail that thing together without an instruction. Yeah. And that's the, does that make sense? I mean, that's the simplest way.
I mean, it sounds
You've got Katie's attention here. She's wrapped.
Yeah. I'm a little scared. I mean, it's a little dystopian to think about. But
and this is what all people and investors are experiencing, right? So this is what I refer to as the ontological security. What is the thing when what is my value going to be is over here. That's different than what should we do now and how should we invest and at least create the financial security.
Well, to that point, how do I invest around this? Where are we in sort of the investing timeline? Because for so long it's been about the chips, the picks and shovels, the NVIDIAs out there. Now where are you investing? Are you investing in the companies that are doing the using, that are doing the disrupting here?
Right. Well, great question, because I'm glad you asked, because for the internet, it was like a 15-year time horizon before we truly figured out how to build a commerce around this. And this is like a long time is what, Katie, 24 months? So what we're doing is we continue to invest the infrastructure build out, and then you really want to lean into the thematics. So it's not about the Magnificent Seven anymore. It's about magnificent thematics, and there are 4, and they're all accelerating and interacting as a cohort in the same time zone. Okay, so one is deglobalization, which puts you into, wow, things are going to be more complicated, and obviously military and defense spending, which puts you in industrials and materials, should be in your portfolios, 2 of the best performing sectors year to date. Common sense kind of stuff. Artificial intelligence build out, but understand that the accelerant to AI is deglobalization, because it's a cost-saving, productivity, enhancing technology that can replace the complexity and politics of human labor and the cost of it. And then number 3 would be longevity, because AI is accelerating the advancement. And then here in the United States, I would say domestically it's deregulation, which also becomes an accelerant. So as you kind of chapter those out into the sectors, it's tech, industrials, materials, consumer staples for income.
I love
I have a lot to say about this.
I love your thematic look, and I would love to get you back on specifically to talk about that longevity trade, because we've been hearing a lot about that. Sherry, we have to let you go. Sherry Paul, Managing Director, Private Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. Some breaking news right now. This on CSX, the shares turning higher. This after Bloomberg is reporting that Goldman Sachs is apparently working with CSX, the railroad, on strategic options. Of course, this comes just a couple of days after we learned a tie-up between Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific, the other 2 big railroads here in the U.S.
Right, and this was the speculation, who is next? We know that the CEO of CSX had said this month that he's open to merger talks. It looks like potentially we're seeing that underway. Still has to be seen whether it culminates into anything.
All right, those shares are turning into the green right now as we continue to keep an eye on big tech with Amazon and Apple on tap after the bell. Full coverage of those earnings and a full breakdown of all of today's market action starts right now.
The closing bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld taking you through to that closing bell with a global simulcast. It's already started. There's Carol Massa. There's Tim Senovic in the radio booth. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television and Radio, our partnership with YouTube. A rally to start the day, one that looks like it's going to end in the red despite big gains from Microsoft and Meta.
Yeah, it's really kind of fascinating to see where the overall numbers are going to end up here. I've been looking at pharmaceuticals. They're down about almost 3% here as a whole. Of course, we heard from the White House some pressure from the president for U.S. drug makers to lower prices. So again, sector specific within what is kind of an overall down market.
Seeing some exuberance, though, when it comes to IPOs, at least in recent days, and today included. Figma shares up 256% as we speak. The IPO was $33 a share. It's at $117.90 right now.
Yeah, just amazing gains on their own. Perhaps made more remarkable by the fact that we are now in a down market, but still Figma sort of trading in its own universe. Going to be interesting to see if that coaxes more of these companies out of that IPO pipeline, which has been heating up a little bit.
Yeah, and you think about the ones that we've had as of late here. You talk about Circle, which of course had a relatively phenomenal post-IPO move, similar with CoreWeave as well. In fact, prior to today, CoreWeave was actually one of your best performing IPOs of the last few months. Figma's going to take that title in just about 20 seconds time as we get the closing bells here in New York. And we've got a lot to get to here in the after hours with tons of earnings, including from Microsoft and, from Amazon and Apple. It was Microsoft and Meta last night. That's one of the few reasons that you're seeing the NASDAQ composite finish the day just barely in the green, up about 10 points as we wait for these numbers to settle. The S&P will decidedly end in the red, down 20 points or 0.4%. The Dow down 0.8%, and the Russell 2000 lower. That's your laggard on the day by almost 1%.
Hey guys, most names in the S&P 500 lower today, about 365 to the downside, 137 gaining ground.
Keep going.
Paramount? Oh, okay. So let's talk about Paramount, if we will, because it's crossing the Bloomberg terminal as we speak. Ticker, of course, is PARA, and let me bring up the numbers here. Let's go to second quarter revenue. The company, $6.85 billion. That is just pretty much in line. The street was looking for $6.87 billion. Second quarter adjusted EPS, continuing operations, 46 cents a share. That compares with an estimate of 37 cents a share. We are seeing the stock, I think initially, are we seeing it?
Yeah, it's kind of fluctuating, Carol, between gains and losses here. Of course, the stock that is going to be absorbed into Skydance and repurposed, if you will, one of the many earnings that we're waiting to cross the wire, and that includes Amazon. Carol, I believe Amazon earnings now on the tape.
All right, so let's get to it because we did see the stock gaining in the regular trade. Let's get to it. Second quarter EPS, $1.68. That is 35 cents better than the street was expecting. Second quarter net sales, folks, $167.7 billion. Again, that's a beat. 162.15 was what the street was looking for. AWS, always important. Net sales ex FX up 17%. That's in line with what the street was expecting. Second quarter operating margin, 11.4%. That too, Tim, is a beat. 10.4% was what the street was expecting. Outlook, always important, sees third quarter net sales of 174 to 179.5 billion, and Tim, the street was looking for 173.24. So that's a beat. Stock right now up about 1.25% here in the aftermarket.
Looking at what Andy Jassy says to shareholders, our conviction that AI will change every customer experience is starting to play out as we've expanded Alexa Plus to millions of customers. Continue to see our shopping agent used by many millions of customers. Launched AI models like Deep Fleet that optimize productivity path with our 1 million plus robots. Made it much easier for software developers to write code. In addition, he says our AI progress across the board continues to improve our customer experiences, speed of innovation, operational efficiency, and business growth. Andy Jassy is excited, he says, for what lies ahead. Shares now lower by about 1%.
Let's talk a little bit about what they see ahead. Third quarter net sales between $175 billion to $179.5 billion. The estimate had been for $173.2 billion, so a little bit of an upgrade there. AWS, just to go back to it, remember there was a lot of focus on this because it's AWS, but also because we saw Microsoft put up big numbers yesterday when it came to Azure, but it looks like net sales for AWS beating as well.
All right, just real quickly, Roku shares higher in the after-hours trade as well. The company coming in with second quarter EPS of about 7 cents. The street was actually looking for a loss, so a beat on that metric. Revenue up 15% to $1.11 billion, and that is a beat over what the street was looking for, guys.